able then to improve and chart a new.
One edit, $10 billion. Reputation in ruins. A broadcast mistake becomes a global reckoning. When journalism, power, and courts collide, the BBC's credibility on trial worldwide. From newsroom edit to historic lawsuit.
Hello, I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching another episode of Explained with me. What happens when the world's most famous public broadcaster collides with the world's most controversial world leaders in a courtroom? This is Explained, and today we're unpacking one of the biggest media crises in modern history. The BBC, which is a 103-year-old institution. A collision of editorial controversy, internal whistleblowing, senior resignations, and a staggering $10 billion lawsuit filed by US President Donald Trump. At the center of the storm is a single edit in a Panorama documentary. An edit the broadcaster now admits was misleading, but the consequences have spread far beyond one program. So what exactly did the BBC do? Why is Trump suing in Florida? And could this lawsuit genuinely threaten the BBC's future? Now, the controversy began with a 2024 Panorama documentary titled Trump, A Second Chance, broadcast shortly before the US presidential election. The program examined Donald Trump's political comeback and revisited the events of January 6, 2021. In doing so, it included a clip from Trump's speech to supporters that day. The BBC later acknowledged that the clip had been edited by splicing together two statements made nearly an hour apart. The resulting sequence combined Trump's phrase, "We fight like hell," with his call to walk down to the Capitol, while omitting his instruction for supporters to march peacefully and patriotically. That edit proved pivotal. Critics argued it created a misleading impression that Trump explicitly encouraged violent action. Trump has long denied inciting the Capitol riot, and the BBC ultimately conceded that the edit gave the wrong impression. The broadcaster issued a public apology, describing the mistake as an unintentional error of judgment. However, by that point, the damage was already done. The fallout inside the BBC was swift and dramatic. A leaked internal memo written by former Ethics and Standards advisor Michael Prescott did more than highlight the Panorama edit. It alleged deeper systemic problems within the corporation, including claims of political and ideological bias across multiple areas of coverage. The memo intensified scrutiny of BBC leadership and editorial oversight. Within weeks, Director General Tim Davie and News Chief Executive Deborah Turness both resigned, marking an extraordinary moment for the broadcaster and underscoring the severity of the crisis. On December 15, 2025, Donald Trump escalated matters further by filing a lawsuit in federal court in Florida. He is seeking at least $10 billion in damages, split evenly between claims of defamation and violations of Florida's deceptive and unfair trade practices law. Trump argues that the BBC knowingly misrepresented his words, harming his reputation, diminishing the value of his personal brand, and undermining his standing as a leader. The BBC, while acknowledging the edit was misleading, maintains that Trump has no legal basis to sue. Florida was not chosen at random. Trump is legally resident in the state, and his lawsuit argues that the BBC has sufficient ties there to justify jurisdiction. According to the filing, the broadcaster maintains an office in Coral Gables, operates Florida-focused web pages, and sent film crews to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. Although the Panorama episode was not broadcast on US television, Trump's lawyers argue it was accessible through the BBC's BritBox streaming service and via VPNs, making it available to American viewers. Legally, Trump faces three hurdles. Under US law, public figures bringing defamation claims must prove not only that a statement was false and damaging, but also that the defendant acted with actual malice, meaning the BBC either knew the statement was false or recklessly disregarded the truth. This is a notoriously high bar. During the discovery process, Trump's lawyers are expected to seek internal BBC emails, editorial discussions, and drafts in an effort to show that warnings were ignored or that the journalists knowingly misled viewers. The Prescott memo, which criticized Panorama's editing and alleged broader bias, could become a key piece of evidence in that effort. Now, Trump's lawsuit also invokes consumer protection laws that prohibit deceptive or unethical business practices. Such laws are rarely successful in defamation cases involving media organizations, as courts have generally ruled that they are intended to address consumer fraud rather than published speech. Nonetheless, the claim adds another layer of legal pressure and raises the stakes for the BBC. The broadcaster has signaled it will fight the case vigorously. The BBC is likely to rely heavily on First Amendment protections, which provide some of the strongest legal safeguards for journalists in the world. It may also invoke anti-slap laws designed to quickly dismiss lawsuits that are seen as retaliatory or lacking merit. Additionally, the BBC can argue that the documentary was substantially true, pointing to the findings of a US House of Representatives committee that identified Trump as the central cause of the January 6th riot, even if specific editing choices were flawed. The BBC has said it will defend the case. The broadcaster has already apologized, admitting an error of judgment, but insists there is no legal basis for the lawsuit. Let's listen in to what WAS Treating had to say.
The BBC is one of the most trusted news sources, not just in this country, but the world over. And in corners of the world where democracy is threatened and tyranny thrives, it is the BBC World Service that provides that free, independent, high-quality journalism that otherwise would not be available. And that's why it's important to hold the BBC to high standards, and why when the BBC falls short of those high standards, they're accountable for those decisions.
Now, while the $10 billion figure is eye-catching, legal experts caution that such sums are often used as leverage rather than realistic expectations. Any damages would ultimately be decided by a judge or jury, and a payout on that scale would be highly unlikely. Still, the lawsuit adds to a growing list of legal battles Trump has pursued against media organizations, including previous multi-billion-dollar claims against CBS and the Wall Street Journal. Crucially, this lawsuit lands at a moment when the BBC is already under intense scrutiny for a series of unrelated but damaging controversies. These include the handling of the Hugh Edwards scandal, Ofcom sanctions over a misleading Gaza documentary, backlash over the Glastonbury live stream that featured chants against the Israeli military, and allegations of ideological capture and workplace culture problems within the corporation. Together, these episodes have fueled a broader debate about whether the BBC has lost editorial discipline and public trust. What happens next will depend on several key developments. A judge must first decide whether the Florida court has jurisdiction. If not, the case could be dismissed or refiled elsewhere. If it proceeds, discovery could expose internal BBC communications that further damage the broadcaster's reputation, regardless of the final legal outcome. Settlement talks are also possible, particularly given Trump's history of resolving high-profile media lawsuits out of court. Now, on this episode of Explained, the key takeaway is clear. Even if the BBC ultimately prevails in court, the real battle is over credibility. This crisis is about more than one edit or one lawsuit. It is a defining test of whether one of the world's most influential broadcasters can rebuild trust and prove that it still lives up to its own standards in an age of relentless scrutiny and deep political division.